This podcast is recorded at Windsor Public Library, which sits on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations and includes the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. We respect and honor First Nations' long-standing relationship to the land along the Detroit River in what is now called Windsor, Essex County.
We're back for Sports on the Fringe episode, part 2. So it's just Carla and I. Not that we don't want Mary Lou here, but Mary Lou was in our last episode, as everyone who's listened to it knows. So Carla and I are going to focus on ice sports today. And the main reason for that is because both of us have experience and history with ice sports in Windsor. So Carla, you're going to kick us off with curling, which is a passion of yours.
Yes, I'm going to be speaking about the Roseland Curling Club. I've chosen to talk about the history of Roseland Curling Club because I have a personal connection to it. I have been curling there for over 20 years. And like so many other curlers, I was greatly saddened when I heard the news last year that Roseland would be closing its doors for good. Roseland has been in the media a lot recently, if anybody out there is paying attention to our media outlets. And that's because Windsor City Council voted to close the curling club in August of 2023, with plans to tear down the property and have a developer build perhaps luxury condos in its place. The last rocks were thrown at Roseland in April of 2023, and there was a big party and celebration to remember the good times we all shared there. For a while, the future of curling in Windsor was kind of up in the air. Nobody really knew what was going to happen. Were we going to get a new place? And I can confirm that curling is being moved to another location, the Capri Pizzeria Recreational Complex, and we'll be there for the 2024-25 season. And as of the time of recording, I have yet to see the facility, but I've heard good things. We have a committee who's been working closely with the city to ensure that the curlers' needs are met in terms of quality of ice. And we hope it proves to be a good spot for us and that it helps to attract new players to the sport.
So when does the season officially kick off?
So actually, interesting you say that because we were supposed to start today.
Oh,
tonight.
That's kind of a little ironic.
Yeah, but it has been delayed by a week because the facility is not quite ready yet.
Okay.
So,
is that because they have to make sure the ice is because people that don't know, curling ice is very different than skating ice.
Yeah, curling ice is pebble. The surface is pebbled. So there's texture to the top of the ice,
right.
Unlike figure skating or hockey ice. It needs that in order for the rocks to go down the ice at the right rate and to allow them to curl, hence the name of the sport. So yes, there are some differences though between the new facility and Roseland. Roseland had 6 sheets of ice. On each sheet, 2 teams can play, so 12 teams could play at one time at Roseland.
Okay.
That's going down by 1 sheet. We'll have only 5 at the Capri Arena, so 10 teams can play at a time. But they are building us a lounge as well, where we can have sort of an after-game drink and toast, and that's actually a big part of the game. Like the sportsmanship of curling is actually a big part of the game. Yeah. There's people joke that it's like a beer sport, beer leagues. Yeah, to some extent, but at Roseland we had about 400 curlers across all of our leagues. Yeah. So that's not too bad.
That's significant, yeah.
But it's not a sport that a lot of people think about in Windsor. We tend to think about hockey, baseball, sort of more conventional sports.
Exactly.
Figure skating.
Yeah. It's that quintessential winter sport that more northern, I guess, climates in Canada. It's
anywhere north of here, and also out in the prairies, it's just absolutely huge. It's huge. All right, so let's get back to Roseland. I'll tell you a little bit about it. The Roseland Curling Club was built in 1978, and it opened on January 15th, 1979, as the area's first municipally owned curling facility. The curling club was just on the edge of the heritage-designated Roseland Golf Course, which was designed in 1926 and purchased by the City of Windsor in 1972. The ice surface at Roseland held 6 sheets, as I mentioned. So for non-curlers out there, each head-to-head match is held on a sheet. So that means 12 teams could play at one time at Roseland. Plus, there was a clubhouse, a huge clubhouse, which allowed everyone to hang out and have a drink and socialize after the match. And that is a big part of the game, the camaraderie that curlers share after a match. It's actually a big part of it. And whenever we hold tournaments called bonspiels, that's an important part as well, because in between matches, people are coming from other curling clubs.
Right.
And it's a great place to sort of network and get to know each other. When researching Roseland Curling Club, I didn't want to focus on the building itself. Instead, I thought it would be more interesting to find a story that most people probably didn't know about, something about the curlers who made the place so vibrant and fun. And I landed on a great story from 1985 when a women's team from the Roseland Club made it all the way to the Scott Tournament of Hearts. The Scottie, as we curlers like to call it, is the premier women's tournament in Canada. It is the Canadian Women's Curling Championship. It's a national tournament.
Big deal.
Yeah. The nation's best curlers play at this event, with each province and territory sending a team to represent that region. And in 1985, Ontario's team came out of our very own Roseland Curling Club. This is particularly impressive to me because Windsor, as I said, is not known as a curling town. Being this far south in Canada, we are greatly influenced by American sports and culture, and so we tend to hear a lot more about hockey, football, baseball, but there were, and there still are, amazing curlers who live right here in Windsor. And I'll pause here for a quick explanation of curling positions because I'll be referring to them a few times. There are 4 curlers on a team: the lead, who throws the first 2 rocks, the second, who throws the second 2 rocks, the vice, who throws the third rocks and helps with general game strategy, and the skip, who throws the last and most critical rocks and generally makes all the calls for the team. The 1985 Ontario team was comprised of 4 women in their mid-20s. Playing lead was Debbie Brousseau. Playing second was Bev Mainwaring. Playing vice was Sue Bell. And skipping was Pam Leavitt. Their coach was the local sports legend Alice Bell, who was also Sue Bell's mother. Alice Bell was an avid curler and curling instructor, and she was inducted to the Windsor-Essex County Sports Hall of Fame in 2017 as the only curler to make that prestigious list so far. Bev Mainwaring noted that their coach Alice, quote, anticipates the pressure situations and has the knack for creating calm, end quote. She said that in 1985 of her coach. Back to the team, Sue, Bev, and Pam played the game together since they were teens, while Debbie joined them later on. In the Windsor Star, they had an interview on February 16th, 1985, and the team says that there were 2 key factors to assembling their winning team. Number 1, a strong willingness to commit to the team, and number 2, the ability to take time off work to compete. So that's an important part because unlike professional athletes who get paid a hefty salary to play their sport, curlers competing at the top tier of their sport still keep a day job. So having the ability to get time away from work is vitally important to a team's success. The team also credits much of their success to their near-perfect delivery style, which can take years to master. I noticed in that interview repeatedly they kept talking about how they were trying to hone a perfect delivery. So, in addition to practicing regularly, the team really aimed to foster a strong friendship on and off the ice to ensure a sense of teamwork and great communication skills. There is a lot of communication in the sport of curling.
It's not just yelling.
It sounds like yelling to the viewer, but in the game it's important and it means something.
It's very strategic, like the way the rock has to curl to hit. I don't understand the basics, like the terms, but when you watch like the Olympics or like the major tournaments, it's one of those things where you're just like, there's a skill here that very few people I think have, because you have to have good eye, you have to have good release, and there's more to it than I think people give it proper credit for.
I recommend anyone out there to try it who hasn't tried it yet, and it will definitely engage muscles you haven't engaged in a long time. It's a lot more physical than you think, and it is a game of strategy, as you said, Erica. Like it's sort of like chess on ice. It's
chess on ice. I mean, it's like a little bit of like billiards on ice, like lawn bowling on ice. Like there's a method to it. Yeah.
So the team, the 1985 team, they would exercise together. They did everything together. They dined together. They shopped together. They swam together. The team also admitted to having a lot of superstitions, which is not uncommon for athletes, I think. For example, They all wore the same opal earrings for good luck. They believed that the number 2 was their lucky number. And they had a bunch of little mascots that they would put up in their locker room before matches, little tchotchkes. Ultimately, though, I think the key to their success was not only their tremendous athletic skill, but also their ability to gel as teammates. As skip Pam Leavitt said of her teammates, quote, "We've never had consistent misses, seeming to have the knack of picking each other up when something went wrong," end quote. To qualify for the Scott Tournament of Hearts, the team first had to win the provincial championship, which they did in January of 1985 in Dryden, Ontario. The team had won a number of provincial tournaments at various levels up to this point, but had never qualified for a national championship until now. The 1985 Scott Tournament of Hearts was held in Winnipeg, Manitoba from February 21st to March 3rd. 11 teams vied for the women's championship that year. As I mentioned earlier, curlers have a day job, and this means that teams often have to pay their own way to major tournaments. So prior to leaving for Winnipeg, Pam Leavitt applied to the City of Windsor for a grant to help offset some of the travel costs. She and the team were granted $2,300 from the city. And in reviewing this material for this podcast episode, I was surprised to see quite a bit of criticism from some of the journalists at that time. There was
about
a lot
the
of
money, how much money she got?
Yes, some of the journalists felt that this team was being favored because they curled out of a city facility. Other teams have not been given this generous donation of money to compete in whatever sport they compete in, but for some reason, this women's team was being given special treatment.
This is 1985?
1985.
So $2,300 is a significant amount of money, but in correlation to where they were competing, that puts Windsor on the map.
I agree. I would have felt like it would have been a celebrated thing. Well, let's put it this way. I only saw criticism from journalists. It appeared to me that the community was very excited to see their hometown represented at the national level, and they supported this Roseland team. So I'm sure they supported this grant of money given to them to help them on their way to Winnipeg. There was a big wine and cheese party at Roseland to see the team off to Winnipeg. Several hundred people showed up to wish them luck, and they enjoyed a 2-end exhibition match between Team Leavitt and a men's team from Kingsville that evening. I do not know who the winner was. It was not reported in the paper. I don't know why.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah, they didn't say who won. It was only 2 ends. Usually, so like in my league, an adult league at Roseland, and now Capri Arena, we play 8 ends.
Okay.
At the national level, you're playing 10 ends. It's a longer game. So only a 2-end exhibition
is a
very short game. So I hope the women beat the men, but that's...
It's a little bit makes me suspicious that they didn't publish it because they didn't win. I mean, that's me being cynical, but maybe they didn't want to draw attention to it. I don't know.
The Roseland team competed at the Scotty, and they ultimately finished 9th out of 11. Their record was 3 wins and 7 losses. The team from British Columbia won the national title that year, but Pam Leavitt and her team received a hero's welcome when they returned to Windsor, with another big celebration to welcome them back. The Leavitt team made it to the provincial championships again in 1986, and if they had won that, they would have gone again to the Scotty. But unfortunately, they lost to a team from St. Catharines, who was skipped by Marilyn Dart. So the team representing Ontario that year was from St. Catharines, not Windsor, in 1986. So that's my story about the curling team from Windsor that made it all the way to the national title. Before we wrap up this part of the story, I just want to plug a couple of resources that I used for researching this topic. First off, of course, as I've mentioned, there's the Windsor Star database, which you can access through our website, windsorpubliclibrary.com. And the other is a book by local author Ted Zale about the history of Windsor Curling Club, which was published in 2021. We have a copy available at the local history branch where Mary Lou is for anyone interested in learning more about the sport of curling in Windsor and other little bits of trivia about the game.
So what got you into curling, Carla?
So I was about 18, maybe 17, and the Olympics had just been on, and my friend in high school, Jen, we both thought curling looked like a lot of fun. Her parents already curled, but she had never done it. And in that year that we became interested in it, our high school decided to try a curling team. So we tried out, we made the team, and we've loved it ever since. So that's it.
So do you still curl with Jen?
I do.
Yeah.
She's my skip.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, because she has to be in charge. Hey, Jen.
Shout out to Jen.
Yeah, that's how I got interested. I was a teenager.
How competitive, like, could you go further if you wanted to? Or is this, I mean, age is a factor too. Not saying you're old, but body changes happen, and it's hard on the knees, and it's more physical than people realize. But is there opportunity for you to go further if you really wanted to, or do you just like having it as a sport to do during the winter?
Well, I personally like just keeping it as a hobby sport. Yeah. It keeps me active. It's fun. I get to socialize with my friends. It's a great outing once a week for me. In order to become more competitive, you have to invest a lot of time. Like, I think you're going to be curling almost every night of the week. Yeah. And I just don't have that ability to do that. It'd be great, but I don't. Interesting you bring up age, because I think unlike other sports, age isn't as important. I will say, though, that curlers of yesteryear, like we're talking over 30 years ago, you know, you were more likely to see curlers with a bit of a beer gut, or, you know, they weren't they didn't look like they were in peak physical shape. Mm-hmm. But now curlers are chiseled athletes. They really are. Like, they really take it to the next level. So their endurance is very impressive. Their strength is very impressive. I also don't have that desire to dedicate that much of my life to
100% fair. Yeah.
Working out. I guess I'm just not competitive enough. I just do it for the fun of it. But
which I think is just as important, because sometimes when you take things to the next level, some of the joy gets lost. I know people that loved art their entire life, and then they study art history, and then everything is a critic. Like, they're a critic about everything, and it's sort of lost that joy of just enjoying a piece of art. So I think, in my opinion, sports take that notch. When you tighten the notches a little bit on your competitive side and how far you go with the sport, you sometimes, if your heart's not in it, it takes the joy out of it a little bit. Yeah. And it's very important to keep that joy.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. And with respect to age, like some of our premier curlers, like they are either in their late 30s or early 40s. Like, it's not as cutthroat as some other sports where age really does matter. Like,
it's not pounding on your body. Yeah, that's for sure. So if someone wanted to start curling, what would you recommend, no matter their age, what would you recommend they do?
I guess now you'd have to contact the Capri Arena to see if you can book some time. Usually, like, I'll speak for when we were at Roseland, and I hope this continues at our new location. At Roseland, usually Saturdays were reserved for public curling, so you could reserve the ice for a couple of hours. You could get, like, all your friends to come out. Yeah. One lump sum fee for everyone to try it. All the brooms are provided. They put a special piece of tape on the bottom of one shoe so you can slide, and they would have an instructor there to show you how to play the game. So my hope is that that continues as we move to our new spot at Capri Arena, that there will be public curling available for people. As of right now, I don't think we have any real beginner leagues at Capri. The most laid-back league was Friday nights, historically. So if you are brand new to curling and want a consistent league, probably Friday nights would be what you want to go with. Because there are some very competitive leagues that I would recommend you stay away from if you're a beginner. It takes time to master the skills you require. As you release a rock, like when you're taking your shot, you're thinking about 100 things. You're thinking about how fast does this rock have to go? You have to aim it in the right direction. You have to turn the handle in the right direction so that it curls properly. Right. You got to do all that without falling down. Yep. Because you're on ice. So it's yes, it takes time to master it for sure, but it is a lot of fun.
Thanks, Carla. I do love watching it. I really do like watching it was on TV. So I'm big on team sports, and curling is one of those things where it's a small team, but the camaraderie, the athleticism, the enthusiasm for the sport is very evident no matter what tournaments or what competitions you're watching, or if you're just having fun with friends. It's one of those sports where you don't need to know everything about it to have some fun, and I think that's and you don't need to put skates on, which I think deters people from in my case with figure skating, you have to put skates on, and usually if you never put skates on, you're hugging the boards and you're just miserable. And there's always that one person, usually was me, that was trying to keep everyone from falling because I'm the only one that could stand up. Curling is when it's like everybody's just having a good time, and if you're not, you're just, in the warm area drinking.
Yeah, it's that's a sort of a bright point. You mentioned skates. Like in curling, as with any sport, anyone can go kind of overboard with loading up on all the different types of gear you can purchase.
All the equipment,
But with curling, seriously, all you need is a broom, which the club will give you to use if you book your time. And you need a pair of clean running shoes so that they'll put a piece of tape under one that makes it slippery. So one will act as a gripping shoe and the other as a sliding shoe. That's it. That's all you really need for curling. It's not bring your own rocks or anything.
No.
They're too heavy for that.
They're very heavy. Thanks so much, Carla. I hope people get a chance to at least go check out the leagues and watch. Being in Capri, it might be a case of, it's a twin arena now. Do you know they're using the second arena to turn it into the curling, or are they adding
So we are taking one of the pads. It'll be permanent for curling.
Okay.
Because you can't switch it back and forth.
That's what I was
due to
wondering,
the pebbled surface. And also the painted surface. We have the house. That's what we call the rings in curling, the house.
Yeah.
So
you can't take that off.
You can't take that off very easily. So it's kind of a one and done thing for the season.
Yeah. So I'm hoping, because there's another pad there, that people might peek in and generate interest that way, because I learned about hockey from watching hockey players play while I was waiting for them to get off the ice so we could go on the ice as figure skaters. So it might be the same for curling. So fingers crossed that generates some more interest from being in, even though you lost Roseland, gaining some interest that way through just casual observing. So thanks, Carla.
My pleasure.
So I'm going to flip over, as I've alluded to my sport, which is, I was a figure skater for, I think I was 3 when I first put skates on, and my knees finally gave in my early 20s, where they were getting bad in my teens, and I had to finally hang up my skates in, I think, my early 20s. And then I did go back as an adult in my early 30s to an adult team. So I actually skated for synchro skating. I was a team skater. So I did figure skating single, everyone, that single skating with the jumps and everything. I did that as a kid. And then when I was 9, I joined the Rose City Rhythms, which I'm really hoping that there are people from my old team listening to this at some point, because I've seen them throughout the years. I haven't been on the team since 95. So we're going on 30 years here, and
it's time for a reunion.
And so synchro skating is team skating. Back in when I was on the team for Rose City Rhythms, I was on the team from 1986 to, I want to say, 1995-ish. We were a big deal. I'm not even going to sugarcoat that. As a kid, I knew we were doing well as a team. But going back through the newspaper articles of different competitions and highlights of our team from the late 80s and into the 90s, we had like half-page, full-page articles in the Windsor Star. When we talked about this episode, I brought up Windsor Arena. And I'm going to start this story with the Windsor Arena, because the Windsor Arena holds a very, very special place in my heart, as it does, I'm sure, for a lot of people in Windsor, but for different reasons. So it was obviously the home of the Spitfires. It's known as the Barn. I was going through all these articles, and I ended up pulling out all my old skating programs, and we did have a couple competitions at Windsor Arena. So just to give a little history of Windsor Arena, it first opened, it was called the Border Cities Arena, and it opened first in 1926, the 1927 NHL season, and it hosted the Detroit Red Wings that year. Then it was known as the Detroit Cougars. So it actually started as the home of the Detroit Red Wings, which blew my brain.
Yeah, this is like the Red Wings played at the Olympia and then at Joe Louis, and now at Little Caesars Arena. But before all that, was the Barn.
They came across the border and used the Barn.
Amazing.
So it was built in 1925 for the local junior hockey team, and then it was expanded to 6,000 to 9,000 seats for when the Detroit Cougars, now the Detroit Red Wings, came. It is one of the oldest arenas, that type of arena, so it's all wood, in North America. It's hosted, obviously, was home of the Windsor Spitfires. It hosted the University of Windsor Lancers. And in 2008, it finally closed its doors. I think the University of Windsor Lancers used it till 2012. I actually skated one of the last exhibitions with my team at Windsor Arena in 2010. And then that same year, our team opened an exhibition at WFCU. And I will say now, hands down right now, I like the old ice better. I don't like the new. I'm used to the ice. The heating in the arenas that they have now really affects the ice. And I'm used to that old freezing cold arenas where you're like, the ice is hard and you're able to, the friction's different. I don't like the new arenas and the new ice, the way they've set them up with all the heating. So that's just my own personal.
Fascinating.
Windsor Arena has hosted a lot of figure skating exhibitions, a lot of shows. One that, and I'm only bringing this one up now because they're about to do their 50th anniversary. Their final skate is the Torvill and Dean World Tour. Do you know who Torvill and Dean is?
I recall the name.
Okay, so Torvill and Dean are ice dancers. They won the 1984 Olympics, and they were one of the few teams that actually got a perfect score. So I actually have the program from when it was at the Windsor Arena in September of 1986. I still have the program. They have been together for 50 years. They're doing their final tour in England this coming spring. Tickets were $19 in September of 1986 to see them. I was 9 years old, and I remember this like it was yesterday because I was so enamored with them as a team. And on the back of the program is a giant number 6. And the 6 was in the old scoring system for figure skating. It was a 6.0 scale. So they were getting perfect 6s wherever they competed. So at the end of their show, the idea was you lifted up the program to give them a perfect 6.
That's great.
The scoring system is much different now. They have technical scores and artistic scores, and that had to do with the Salier and Pelche controversy, I think in the 94 Olympics, where there was proof that the judges were favoring one. They were being paid off, or I don't remember the logistics behind it, but they were favoring one team over the other, and that's why the two teams ended up getting tied for first. So that's when they changed the scoring system completely. But like I said, that was in 1986. I spent, I want to say, 6 years every Friday night from 7 to 9 in that arena practicing with my team. So at the time, it was called precision skating. It's now called synchro skating. So instead of one skater or a pair skater, you have a group of anywhere from 12 to 32 skaters team skating. So it's, in its most simplest explanation, it's synchro swimming on ice. So everyone's doing similar moves. We do different formations, circles, pinwheels, long lines. It's kind of like the Rockettes on ice. It was a whole team. And I spent my weekends on a bus traveling all over Ontario and parts of the U.S. We flew to different cities for competitions. We were a very close-knit group. And even though I have not seen many of those people in 30 some odd years, there's nothing else in my world for those years. And I'm very grateful to my parents for putting me into skating. It was not something I showed any interest in. It was basically, I was an only child, and the doctor told them I needed to be socialized more as a kid. I don't know. And so they put me in gymnastics, swimming, and skating was the one that I took to the best. I was a single figure skater for years, and then I was 9. They saw an advertisement for Rose City Rhythms. It had only been a group for about a year. I think it started, actually 2 years. I think it started in 84. And so they saw an advertisement in the Windsor Star for tryouts. And I tried out, I got on the team, and I stayed on the team for almost 10 years. At the time, it was a pre-novice team, a novice team, a junior and senior team. So it all depended on age. So pre-novice was the little guy. So I was 9, so I was on the pre-novice team. Novice was about 12 and up. Junior was your mid to late teens, and senior was older. It was all based on size because they wanted everyone to be at the same age level, same competition level. And then later on, when I went back in my 30s, they had developed an adult team. So it was all us people that hadn't skated in years that are trying to do it again and relive our glory, which it was great fun. I'm not going to lie, it was a lot of fun. But when I say we were a big deal, we were a big deal. So I knew at the time that we were rocking competition. So when I was on the pre-novice team, Shelley Barnett was our coach. And she retired recently. She was put into the Chatham Sports Hall of Fame because she's from Chatham. The second year she was our coach, we won every competition. We won in Sarnia. We won in St. Catharines. We won, like, our biggest competitions were Fort Erie and Delhi. Those were the teams that we had to beat. Strathroy. We cleaned house. And we did a little Irish number. I remember we had these yellow and green 1970s looking color dresses, and we just smoked everyone. Shelley went on to Burlington, and this was years later, and became the coach for Nexus. And at that point, it had changed from precision skating to synchro skating, and they had started a world's competition. And Shelley, when she was on Nexus, coaching Nexus, they won worlds 9 years in a row. That's the kind of coach she was.
That's incredible.
So just before Shelley left, we got Shelley McLeod, who was a world champion ice dancer I think she won the worlds in 1980. She choreographed for Brian Orser, Elizabeth Manley, like all those 1988 Olympic bigwigs. And she became our choreographer for a few years.
No way.
She's a jazz singer now. I didn't know that. I was looking up. I did a little stalking online, and she's a jazz singer now, which is good for her. But when you look back and go, holy crap, like, this was a big deal. Like, we had articles in the paper about how we were winning competitions, and we were, like, top 3 easy all the time. I've skated in the Olympic arenas in Lake Placid. I've skated in the Olympic arenas in Montreal. We've competed in Canadians. The highest that my team ever got was 4th in Canada. And that was in the early, I think, 92, 93 year. We did an average of 4 to 5 competitions. So our practices would start early September, right around when school started, and then competitions would start in January. So every other weekend in January, I spent my weekends on a bus with all my closest skating friends, sitting in an arena all weekend, then getting on the ice. We had our team managers, parents are drinking in the stands. Like, that's how I spent my from grade 4 to probably mid-high school. Looking back now, it was the most formative and most fun years of my life. I don't think I appreciate it as much as I now, looking back as an adult. Mm-hmm. I've run into people throughout the years. It's easily like yesterday. So unfortunately, Rose City Rhythms are no longer. They lasted to a few years ago, I believe, and now Amherstburg has a small team. So I haven't actually been on the ice since 2011, which is the longest I've not been on the ice. Do I think I could still do it? I mean, no way that I could previously. It's muscle memory, right? Like, you get your skates on. I still have them. I still have my skate bag with my name on it, like Rose City Rhythms skate bag. I have my bright pink jacket that we wore in the stands. It was neon. And everyone would say something about how bright it was, but the second you walked into the arena in this massive, like, there were teams from all over. You could instantly pick out where your family was and where your teammates were, because you could see them clear across the arena. The smell of those old arenas just takes me back instantly from, like, just spending that time on the ice. Mm-hmm. And my weekends were on the ice. Obviously, Rose City Rhythms were named after the Rose City.
I love the name, by the way.
Yes,
yeah,
it
I
was.
love the name.
I still remember our cheer. We would go to, like you said about the camaraderie of, like, a curling competition. So the big thing at competitions was you would cheer your teams on. I still remember the cheer we did because it's ingrained in my brain. It basically goes, we're the rhythm shuffling crew. Shuffle on down. We'll do it for you. We're not here to cause no trouble. We're just here to do the rhythm shuffle. And we would sing that when our team went on the ice. I still have all my medals. I have 82 medals from my years as a
Wow.
figure skater and as a team skater. So there's a lot to be said for not being on the ice by yourself. It's gone to a whole other level now. Like, now they do lifts. There's, like, it's individual within the team. But at the time, it was, even if you just look at pair skating, like, and single skating from, 20 some odd years ago, like, the skill set has gone through the roof. Like you're saying, like, some people are jacked up for curling. Yeah. We were a big deal within our own circuit, right? I still remember when we got our first gold medal, I must have been 10 years old. And they didn't have podiums because there's 20 of us on the ice. So there's, like, 3 teams with 20.
Okay, so a team would have about 20
So we
skaters.
averaged about, the safe number seemed to be about 24. It was just also formations because we're doing formations. So you need nice, even numbers to do blocks, nice even numbers to do certain lines and certain formations. So some cases we would have subs because people get hurt. I mean, people fall, and that was the other thing that it taught me a lot about teamwork, because we'd be in some very heavy competitions and then somebody falls but it was never turn around and blame that person for falling. I remember one competition, it was sectional, so we were qualifying for the Canadian championships. And one of our members had a really bad fall in one of the formations, and we lost points because of it. But no one got mad. It happens. You got back up. There was never any blame. And I think that taught me a lot about teamwork, because we lost a spot because we lost points. But even though this person would feel awful, I've fallen during competition, and it was never, it's your fault. Like, you did it. It's okay. You just keep going. Things happen. You can get, like, I've been kicked. I've been sliced. Like, it's just part of the sport, and it taught me a lot about teamwork. And figure skating can be a lonely sport if you're a single skater, but with team skating, I encourage people to use YouTube synchro skating, because I think they'll be amazed at what they do now. Like I said, it's not like that when I was a skater, but they've upped the ante big time. I skated synchro with a few people that went on to do well in Canadians as single skaters. They decided to go the opposite, whereas I was a single skater. I went to synchro. They started synchro and went into Jennifer Robinson is the one name that comes to mind, because she did very well in her single skating career, but her and I were a year apart, and I have all these pictures of us as like 8-9 years old synchro skating together. So it was just a wonderful time of my life, and it was one of those fringe sports, because most people think of figure skating as single skating. And synchro skating, again, at the time it was called precision skating, was a very big deal within that skating world. Moving forward with the Windsor Arena, I really hope they save it. There's just a lot of memories there, and it's coming up on its 100th anniversary, and I really hope that with this revitalization project that it is part of that and not just
I hope so too.
Torn down.
It's got such a rich history. I know there's been proposals come forward in the past. There was talk for a bit that the Windsor Express basketball team might
go there, yeah.
Might go there, and I think that'd be a great start.
Yeah.
For sure. Thank you so much for sharing your very cool and personal story about synchro skating. Okay, so full disclosure, I had never heard of synchro skating or precision skating.
Most people haven't, yeah.
I mean, obviously we know about single skating, we know about pairs, we know about ice dancing, all of those.
Yeah.
So why do you think synchro skating isn't on like the Olympic level as we've seen?
I think it's one of those, I would always say just got worlds, but it just got worlds. In the timeline of the history of skating, it's just made the worlds. Will it ever be Olympics? It's possible. It's very different than traditional skating, because you're looking at minimum of 20 people on the ice. So it's a different level of how you interpret it, how you give it points. It very well could be at some point. If breakdancing can be part of the Olympics, then there's no reason why this shouldn't be. I think it just needs its time.
Yeah.
Because I'm not in the world of it anymore, I'm not as aware of where it stands. But in fairness, I'm not in the world of skating anymore. So if I was in that world, I may have a better answer for that. But I don't think it's never going to be. I think it has a potential to be.
Yeah.
It used to be just Canadians and like U.S. champion, like that was the highest you can go, and then it became worlds.
It'd be kind of neat to see synchro skating make it to that level.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've said a number of times that synchro skating is different than singles and other skating that we're more familiar with. In what ways? Like what type of maneuvers do you do? Do you do lifts? Do you do jumps?
When I was competing with Rose City, there was no lifts. There was a very strict guidelines that we had to follow, and both skates could not be off the ice at any point, which is very different than obviously traditional skating as you're doing jumps and that type of thing. Now it's very different. You can do lifts. Actually, it's part of the requirement in the technical skills. When I was skating, you couldn't break off necessarily and be on your own unless you're doing specific footwork. So like if you're doing a pivot or a turn in your block formation, you had to then grab hold on. So we locked arms. So we were like a full line. And we would just break into different formations and different, like I said, we do circles, we do blocks, but you had to like hold on to the person. It was right over left. Like that was how you held on to your co-skater. But now there is more of a singles element within the team aspect, in the sense that you break off. They'll do pivots, they'll do turns, they'll do jumps, but they do it in sync with each other. Whereas when I did it, again, 30 years ago, it was much more on the ice. I like it the other way. I find it a little distracting the way that they've changed it, because now it's more of you're trying to jam in as much technical stuff as possible, and then each team's trying to outskill each other. I want to say it was about 10-15 years ago, there was a competition at WFCU, and that was the first time there was actually a bunch of my former teammates that went. I hadn't seen them in years, and it was the first time a synchro competition had come to Windsor, so we all went as spectators, and some of them hadn't really experienced it since we skated together 15 years prior. And a couple of them commented, like, I don't like it. I'm like, I don't like it either.
It's changed that much.
It's also gotten really hard for, like, the average skater to compete, in my opinion. So they have, like, competition streams and, like, festival streams. So later on, when I went back as an adult skater, we were in the festival stream. So it was more like the happy fun, like, it doesn't really matter, we'll compete. And it's like, oh, we'll just give you a medal and where the competitive side was like, you were competing, and like everyone looked the same. It was that Rockette style. Like everyone was the same height, everyone had the same build, everyone had the same skill set. It was so competitive that the average skater who just wanted to try it couldn't achieve that unless they were able to modify themselves to look like that and skate with those skills. Whereas the festival side of it was for fun, and that's essentially what it was when I was a kid, but it didn't have those two different looks about it. I was out of it for, like I said, almost 15 years, and when I came back, I was absolutely shocked at how much it had changed, and I didn't like it. I thought it had lost there was an innocence and a fun part about it that became so competitive and so strict. We were in the fun festival side of it, and just dividing them up that way didn't seem fair either, but in order for one team to be more competitive and move up, you had to separate. It would be this team constantly beating the other teams. Like there was no competition there, right? So it gave the ones that were less good, quote unquote, a chance to do well and have fun at competitions. So
I have two questions. The first one is, are teams gendered or are there mixed teams? And the second question is, when you went back as an adult, like you were in your 30s, you said.
I was early 30s. I was about 32.
So how did that feel? Because you know what? We think of figure skating as a young skater's game.
Yep.
Like the ones we see competing at high levels, they're like teenagers or early 20s often.
Yeah, their knees still work.
Their knees are very pliable, but
very fun. Yeah.
They're bendy and they're still fresh, and I don't know, but when you're in your 30s, things are different.
Things were different.
So, like, how was it different? So, are teams gendered, and how was it different going back in your adult years?
So, when I was skating with Rose City in the late 80s, again, I was still pretty young. We had two males on our team. They had, like, basically the boy version of our costumes, of the girl costumes. There was a lot of debate sometimes because of the fact that it was easier to spot them, because if one made a mistake, they were wearing pants, everyone else was wearing tights, so you can kind of like meld people in. But it was even that debate with like white skates versus beige skates. If you stood out at all, you were easier to pick out if you made a mistake. So I had knee braces on at one point, and so I stood out more than my teammates because I had these giant knee braces on. I have not seen a lot of male synchro skaters. Does that mean that they can't be part of it? No. So as far as going back in my 30s, the long story of this is I had heard that they were doing an adult team. So when we were younger, it was called the Masters team, and they were like old. Like it was just they're doing basics, pumps, and like slow around the ice, and you're cheering them on so they feel good about themselves. They formed quote unquote adult team, which basically you've outgrown the senior team, which was I think up till mid-20s, and so if you still want to be on the ice. So at the time, Rose City didn't have, I don't believe they had a senior or junior team. They just had the little guys. So the juvenile, pre-novice became juvenile and novice team. So it was just the little ones. I know a couple of them were the children of people I used to skate with, which was a little weird, I'm not going to lie. So I went back. So I found out that one of my old teammates was coaching. So I walked over to Forest Glade Arena and saw them practice. This was early September. And they're like, oh, do you think? I'm like, I don't know. I haven't been on skates in a long time. I'm like, oh, just come out and give it a try.
Yeah.
And it was like I picked it up instantly. I took a little bit to get it, just kind of get your equilibrium back, but it was all muscle memory. So within 2 practices, I mean, I couldn't do the intense stuff that I used to when I was a little more limber, and you instantly just sort of picked it back up, like right over left, you hold on to your neighbor, like you hold on to your teammates, you're doing the formations. I still remember my footwork from 30 years ago because we would just do off ice practices, so it was, you know, rejigging those movements again. It was great fun on the ice. We won a couple medals that season. I think I had to stop because work got in the way. I was working a very intense job at the time, and it was getting harder and harder for me to get away and travel too. But what the funny thing was, we would go away to away competitions, and instead of being on a bus with chaperones, it was just us all driving in our cars, and like we were the chaperones of our own selves. So we were just adults, and it was just being a kid again, but like we had no boundaries because we weren't the kid that had to be in bed by 10.
No supervision.
Yeah, no supervision. People ranged from like their late 20s to their late 50s, and it was just, we're all just having a blast. So it was that team side of it, and then, you know, you got to go get down to the dressing room, you know, 20 minutes before your flight starts, so you can get changed and get into your costume and get all your makeup on. And like I think I had short hair at the time, but when I was younger, I always had long hair, and it was like gelling it back so you could like bounce a quarter off of it. I mean, I might try and get back. I don't know. It's been a lot. This is the longest stretch I've gone without being on the ice. So, but going back in my 30s, it was great fun. I'm so glad. I only did it for a couple of years, but I'm so glad I did it because I also feel like I had full closure because my knees were the ones that knees forced me to quit when I was in my 20s. They were just so swollen. I just couldn't do it anymore. I was risking knee surgery at the time. And so it was one of those things I think I needed to like get redemption against my own body and just be like, I can still do this and still have fun. It's obviously not the level that I used to, but it's still available for me to participate in.
Yeah, that's
great. And I think I needed that closure too. And I met a lot of new people too, and one of my dear friends to this day was somebody I met going back in my early 30s, and I'm so grateful I did that because I met a whole new group of skating folks out of that as well. The fact that I was so tight with my teammates really changes the way, and I'm sure you feel that with curling too, because you have to really rely on your teammates.
I am a team sport player. I enjoy watching individual sports like track and field and single skating, and all these, you know, individual sports are great to watch, but to compete and to play, I'm definitely a team sport kind of person. I enjoy the group collaboration.
Yeah.
In curling, you know, the skip calls the shots, but it's like every teammate can contribute their ideas to what the next strategy should be, what the next move should be. And as you said, you know, you talked about the story about your teammate had a bad fall, and then you weren't able to make it to the next level. We all have a bad game, and that aspect of team sport, I appreciate that. Yeah. You know, you're there to pick each other up, and it's not always about the competition. It's about the camaraderie, and
bringing it back to the idea of sports on the fringe, it doesn't have to be the big four, which are basketball, hockey, baseball, and football. It does not have to be those big four. We talked about wrestling in our last episode. Yep. Not necessarily a team sport, but there's a camaraderie there. And I think it's important to look at sports in different ways, as rather than just those big, sometimes very expensive and inaccessible sports, that there are other options out there for kids to be active or for people to be involved in. That
at all age levels,
at all age levels, that can keep you happy and healthy and connected with people. And ultimately, I think that's what it comes down to: is sports is about connection. I really hope that is a momentum that keeps going in the sports world, and just how much it can really impact people's lives, especially as you get older and you can't do it as much anymore. But having that camaraderie with people, and it doesn't have to be a big expensive thing.
I wanted to ask you as well, you said you started in September usually for your competitions and your practices. When was the end of the season?
It depended how far we went in competition. So if we got past sectionals, so I believe we had 2 competitions in January, Usually the first one in January was in a U.S. competition. Notoriously went to Buffalo or Lake Placid. And then sectionals, which would be for Southwest, so our part of Southwestern Ontario, would qualify us for Canadians. And that was usually end of February, early March. And then Canadians could go into, you could prep for that or practice for that until April. So the latest I remember skating is late April. And we had a competition in Edmonton. That's where we competed at Canadians that year. When I was not a teenager, when I was just not working, my parents wanted me out of the house for the summer, I would do summer skate school, which was at the old Riverside Arena, which no longer exists. But I would spend 4 hours a day on the ice a few times a week in the summer and just hone my own single skills. And then tryouts would happen again beginning of September, right around school started, and we just do it all over again. So the earliest I think we ever stopped a season was March, and I think the latest would have been end of April. And so that's for the competitions. So September, December was learn your routine, hone your skill set, get the team together, you're getting your costumes ready, you're doing all that stuff, and then competition season would be January to March, minimum.
It's pretty similar, actually, to curling, because curling runs from about now, mid-October, to about the first week of April is when we typically end. So it's a 6-month season. It's pretty lengthy. Yeah. So I could see how a new curler, that might be too big of a commitment. So
it's, I think that's why I think like little taste testing options, no matter the sport, is great, because you also don't want to be trying it with the people that have been doing it for decades, because that's intimidating.
Absolutely. I've been there. I've been at every level and been intimidated at every level.
Exactly. And then you're like, okay, I can't get to that, so I don't want to hold them back. And so I think having those little testers are super important as well. Most figure skating clubs, no matter where you are, have a beginner's level. Majority of them are for little kids. Like Tim Hortons does the recreation skates in the winter, which are great ways to just get on the ice. The only thing as a figure skater I hated is you could only go in one direction. You could only skate the same direction all around, and you couldn't do anything but skate. When you have a certain skill set, it's like letting a dog loose that's been caged. You just want to go and do your footwork and do your jumps and do your edges, but when you just have to go the same, I hated going to those things. But it's a good way to get on the ice and just try it out. I think this was a good walk down memory lane for both of us.
It was.
I'm glad we talked about this episode, because I think this one, more so this episode than the previous one, was one of our more personal ones, and sometimes that is a good glimpse into how much things that we do in our community matter, because I know we're not the only ones that have experiences like this, not just with sports, but with arts, with whatever the case may be. So I hope this may start a conversation with people, or if anything, reconnect with people that curled or skated in the past. Thanks so much, Carla, for joining me today.
So fun.
And stay tuned for our next episode, which will be coming out shortly.